Welcome to the Corporate Director Podcast, where we discuss the experiences and ideas behind what's working in corporate board governance in our digital tech-fueled world. Here, you'll discover new insights from corporate leaders and governance researchers with compelling stories about corporate governance, strategy, board culture, risk management, digital transformation, and more.
Hello, and welcome back to the Corporate Director Podcast, the voice of modern governance. My name is Megan Day, strategy leader here at Diligent, and I'm joined by my co-host with the co-most, Dottie Schindlinger, executive director of the Diligent Institute. Dottie, welcome.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for reading our intro. If you can't tell from my voice, I'm a little under the weather, and so Megan very kindly decided to spare you all from the gravel in my voice today.
Well, no worries, because I've called in some extra reinforcements. Also joining us today is our producer, Kira Ciccarelli, who is Senior Manager of Research and Programs at the Diligent Institute. Kira, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on this end of my new microphone.
Well, Kira, we're excited to have you join us on this side of the microphone to share a little bit about an annual research project you conduct with our friends over at Corporate Board Member and FTI Consulting.
Yeah, it was great. We got a chance to speak with Melanie Nolen, who is the head of research at Corporate Board Member. She heads up this project each year, which you mentioned. We at the Diligent Institute partnered with them on it. We've been doing that for about 5 years now, and FTI Consulting joined us this year as well. So it was nice to talk to Melanie a little bit and get into some of the key findings from the report and give everybody a little bit of a sneak preview before it goes live here in the next couple weeks.
Well, I think it makes sense to dive in. Let's give a listen to what the findings were, and we can come back and discuss.
Can't wait.
Joining us on the Corporate Director Podcast today is Melanie Nolen, Head of Research at Chief Executive Group. Melanie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kira.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today about our What Directors Think report, but I think we should start off by having you introduce yourself and your role at Corporate Board Member to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the head of research at Chief Executive Group, which is the parent company for Corporate Board Member, Chief Executive Magazine, Strategic CFO 360, the Leadership CFO Leadership Council, and our Strategic CHRO Network. So all of these groups make up the C-suite on the board, and my role is to conduct research among our communities and find out what the priorities, challenges, top issues are, get everybody talking, get everybody sharing insights, what works, what doesn't. That's the idea with our research programs at Chief Executive Group.
Great. Thank you for that. So as I mentioned, I'm really excited to dig into our report today, which is the 2025 edition of What Directors Think, which Diligent Institute partnered on with Corporate Board Member and FTI Consulting. Would you tell our listeners a bit about the project?
Absolutely. So What Directors Think is our flagship research. We've been running it since, well, I think it's our 22nd year right now. It was a project that was set up by T.K. Gerstetter, who was the founder, I should say, of Corporate Board Member back in the day. It's an annual survey that looks at everything inside the boardroom. So we're taking a look at every governance issue that is under director's purview and just looking at, again, same premise as the rest of our research. What's working, what's not, what's changing, are there new issues on the table, new ways of doing things, how are boards composition evolving? I mean, there's just like everything you can imagine that pertains to corporate governance. We try to cover it. We have a pretty good blend of respondents that participate, so we'll get maybe 200 to 300 directors participating on average each year, and the demographics are really varied. We find almost an equal representation across committees, which is really nice. And we have a pretty wide range of tenures and sectors. So it really allows us to take an exclusive look, an exclusive peek inside boardrooms across public companies in the United States and see how things are changing over time.
Great. And obviously, this survey fielded a little bit before our publication date, which is going to be coming up soon here in February. So could you tell us roughly when this survey fielded and about how many respondents we got?
Yeah, every year it's the same format. So we field every September through October. Everything is done digitally. So directors, and we pre-screen directors that we invite to take part in the survey. Those are our Corporate Board Member magazine readers, of public company board members who have engaged with corporate board member on different levels, whether that's speaking at our events or attending the events. And so we know that they are actively serving as a director on the board of a public company in the United States. So it fields in September, October, and then we, tally the results. We publish an editorial look inside Corporate Board Magazine's Q1 issue. That story is more based on director interviews because we conduct one-on-one interviews in addition to the survey, digging a little bit deeper inside what we found in the survey itself. So it brings a director voice to the element of the survey, which is really phenomenal. And then in addition to that, then we released the big report, which is what is about to come out now. It's a beast of a report that again covers all the different aspects of the survey and shows what directors said about all of that.
So, as you mentioned, this survey is kind of a mammoth. The report has a ton of information in it. So, starting with some of the headline findings, what did directors say were the big priority and agenda items for 2025?
Yeah, of course, growth is the name of the game in 2025. I think that came out as a clear top priority for public companies and, topics of conversations inside the boardroom. M&A being particularly at the forefront on that point, which is not really that surprising for public companies to use M&A as a growth strategy. We did see an uptick also in the prioritizing of CEO succession planning, which, the issue itself isn't surprising. It is a big board job. But considering the level of CO turnover these past few years, I think it's finding its way back to the top of the agenda where directors are saying that, 10 years are getting shorter. Having a younger CO doesn't mean you're set for decades anymore. You have to plan for this. You have to contingency plan. So you have to have a few people in your pipeline at different levels of readiness. So there's a big focus on that now on almost stress testing the succession plan. Two interesting findings for me were also the growing risk in the geopolitical landscape. Of course, for those companies operating internationally, that did come out of the survey. And then the proportion of directors who now view speaking out on, mainly controversial issues to be a major reputational risk for their companies. I don't think either one of those findings is a surprise for anyone, but it's really telling that the risks are coming from all sides now. They're more diversified. And what we're finding is that's put scenario planning, crisis management plans at the forefront of boardroom discussions.
So that is a lot of stuff. I think all of them, I think all of these things related to, you mentioned the pursuit of growth opportunities in 2025. I think sort of compared to the past few years on the survey, when we saw a little bit more of a focus maybe on, cutting costs, streamlining financials, things like that. You mentioned the CEO succession planning point as well, kind of coming up higher on the list of priorities this year. Where else did CEO succession planning come up in the survey, and how does this compare to where it's ranked in previous years?
So that's really interesting. So CEO succession planning, I need to be precise. CEO succession planning came in the fourth place on the list of priorities for 2025. The three that were ahead of it were growth, M&A, and streamlining financials. So as you can tell, same theme for the first three, and then boom, we fall right onto the succession planning strategy. It was also third on the list of agenda items that directors say are pressing for them to discuss this year. Again, only behind growth and M&A. And it's the second on the list of issues directors find most challenging to oversee. So again, behind growth, behind strategy, I'm sorry. It's really all of these numbers, by the way, are from last year. And we do provide the year-to-year comparison in the report so you can tell how much of a priority it is becoming. But it's also interesting in the findings where it came up, in addition to being a priority, is that only 20, I think it was 21% of those who participated said that their succession planning process for the CEO was excellent, which further stresses possibly why this issue is getting so much attention right now. If you have doubt that you have a sturdy process, you may want to revisit it as soon as possible.
And that nexus is so crucial every year on the survey when I think about what directors list as the top priorities for their organizations, what they list as top agenda items that they want to be talking about in the boardroom, what they're having trouble overseeing, and then how they're kind of rating their confidence on those issues. Where those three or four things intersect, that's really, really important, right? We see that a lot with cyber too. If it's something they're talking about a lot and something that they don't feel very comfortable overseeing or they're having issues with it, definitely an area that you want to pay attention to. So, listeners, stay tuned to our forthcoming Director Confidence Index surveys where we might dig a little bit deeper in here. Another issue that you mentioned as far as what directors are having difficulty overseeing is strategy. So they listed this as the number one issue that they have the most trouble overseeing in their roles. This is the first time I've seen this issue rank so highly, and it also might come off as a bit concerning considering strategy oversight is a really core component of the director role. So what's your take on this finding?
Yeah, this was very surprising to me as well, but the one-on-one interview portion of the research just helped clarify what this means right now. And what directors are telling us is that, the level of disruption has become a norm. It is to be expected now. It's not what if there's a disruption. I think it is what that disruption will look like. And so it goes back to the idea that, the 10, 15 year strategic plan, that's there's just no such thing anymore. They're basically telling us, of course, you need to have a long-term vision. Every company needs that. But you likely not going to look like that. So your strategy right now is more along the 3, 5 year duration. And so it's and even inside that, you need to be ready to pivot. And so what they're telling us is there's a lot of, again, scenario planning on the strategy, beta testing almost. Okay, this is our plan. Let's just execute it in one region or within one consumer segment. Let's just see how that goes. What gets in the way, and trying to see around corners before applying it more broadly.
So, on a related note, this is the first time that I can remember cybersecurity and cyber strategy not ranking in the top two issues that directors are having the most difficulty overseeing. Is it that they think they're maybe getting better at wrapping their arms around this issue? Is it that they still view cyber risk as a big issue area for them, but other problems are maybe ranking a little bit higher? What else did directors have to say about cyber strategy and risk this year?
Yeah, that's a good point, and you're right. I don't remember when cybersecurity was not the top answer here. And would have to go back several years. But this is another one where my one-on-one conversations have paid off because directors are really making a point that this is not complacency. This is the work of several years of placing cybersecurity at the top of their priorities list, making sure their companies had not only good defenses in place, but also that they had the right incidents identification and reporting process. Every single director I've spoken with has said the same thing. Cybersecurity remains a major risk, and they are very well looking into it at every meeting. They're bringing in the right people into the meetings as well to help them, in their discussions. Nobody's letting down their guards here. And in fact, some of the findings in the survey attest to that, where that's also a change we've noticed. For instance, 58% of the directors who participated in the survey said they had a director on their board with cybersecurity expertise. That's a major change from just like 5, 6, 7 years ago. And 71%, nearly three-quarters of them, said that they had, whether that's the CISO, the CIO, the CTO, but the senior executive in charge of cybersecurity who regularly come to board meetings whenever they're discussing cybersecurity. So the boards that participate in our survey, at the very least, have taken very important steps to ensure that they provide the best oversight possible on that topic and that their companies are adequately prepared for an incident wherever or whenever that may come. So it's not complacency. I think they've put the right practices in place.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. And staying in the cyber and tech realm for a minute, then, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about generative AI strategy. What did our respondents have to say about AI this year?
Yeah, that's certainly the issue of the day, right? Everybody's trying to wrap their heads around what that means for their business, for their industry. Based on the survey findings, and I'm going really just off the findings, I'm definitely not the expert in the field here, but it seems that for now, companies, at least public companies, are more focused on the early wins, increasing productivity, efficiencies, supporting customer service efforts. This is all great, but where we're seeing a little bit of a lag is using the technology for innovation. So we can tell the difference in the responses between AI natives and non-native companies in that regard, where, the natives tend to look at technology from a disruption perspective more than, how can we improve on what we already do. Again, not the expert on AI. We do hold regular events here at Corporate Blue Member to help boards think through the technologies. So I would defer to the experts on how to look at AI from the right lens, but those are the findings from the survey.
Great. Well, switching gears a little bit here, we also work with you here at Diligent on the Director Confidence Index, which I mentioned a bit earlier. And this is a quarterly pulse survey of U.S. public company directors on their confidence in the economy and other topical issue areas. It's important to note that since the What Directors Think survey has fielded, we have pulled this group through our DCI twice. What were some of the highlights from our November and December surveys?
Yeah, DCI is a completely different type of survey because it's a flash poll, so it's intended to record directors' views at a very specific point in time. And the past couple of polls have been particularly interesting to track, considering what's going on in the country. We did poll directors right after the election in November to gauge their sentiment for business. Remember, this is not a political initiative. We make sure in our question that we bringing their attention back to the business and the economy. It's not about who they voted for. So we asked them how they believe the Trump administration's policies or proposed policies would help or harm their companies or sector, for instance. In November, right after the election, I mean, optimism for what that meant for business was went it shot up. It had been declining for several months, and in that poll, it went up. I think it was a little over 10%, and just because of the results. Directors were saying, the promise of lower corporate taxes, a trend toward fewer regulations. Those were basically the main reasons why. In fact, 80% had said at the time they believed that this would mean that the stock markets would rise significantly in 2025. So there was a great deal of optimism, and then fast forward just about a month, we polled them again in December, and we noticed a little bit of a slowing on that front. So optimism remained high if you compared it to early parts of the year, but it had dipped a little from the November forecast. And the main reason at the time the directors gave us was, well, what everybody's talking about now, the fear of what the proposed tariffs will mean for the U.S. economy and for business in general. So it'll be telling in our next poll to see where that settles now.
Definitely. I was going to say, as we get through these first 100 days, I'm not sure of a lot, but one thing I am sure of is that there is going to be a flurry of activity most of the time, and we will see what directors think about everything that is to come. So before we transition to the questions that we ask all of our guests, are there any other findings that we didn't touch on that you think it would be important to discuss?
Well, I do want to bring up one point, and it's every year we ask the criteria that are prioritized when seeking to onboard a new director. And we've always found the top ones to be the same. So, a C suite background, strategic planning, financial expertise, industry knowledge, I mean, the basics for having a seat on a board. And this year, digital expertise came in and took over the third place, which is to me very, very telling about how important technology is now and is about to be even more over the next few years. As a reference, it was fourth last year, but it was sixth just a couple of years before that. So it's not a very radical climb, but it is definitely climbing there so much so that it's taken over the spots for strategic planning and financial expertise. So I'm not saying that boards are looking for somebody strictly with digital expertise. I think directors are clear that they want somebody who's got a broader sense of business to sit on the board, but having both, so you have the C-suite expertise and some digital knowledge, I think that's going to help anybody secure a board seat in the years to come.
Really interesting, and we will have to keep an eye on how that tracks in our next surveys. So we are running out of time just a little bit here, so I'll maybe limit it to just one of the questions that we ask all of our guests here on the show. What do you think will be the biggest difference between boardrooms today and 10 years from now?
Yeah, that's tough to predict, right? I mean, it goes back to the idea that if the 10-year strategic plan is no longer, it's hard to have a vision of what a board's going to look like 10 years from now. Change is definitely slower at larger public companies than we're seeing in smaller, mid-sized private organizations. But I do believe that there's changes taking place now. I think that the idea that disruption is just a normal part of business plays a big role. You have to have somebody who's fully dedicated and present. So I think the idea of serving on, 4, 5, 6 boards is now not going to work. You need to be at the ready, and you need to have your energies focused in the company, on the company. So I think that we're going to see a lot more involved boardrooms than we have in the past, and a lot more playing an active role than they have traditionally been assigned. That's my prediction.
Well, I would agree with that. And we will check in 10 years from now and see if you're right. All right, Melanie. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kira.
We've been joined by Melanie Nolen, Head of Research at Chief Executive Group.
Great interview, Kira, and hopefully the first of many for you on the show.
Yeah, it was nice getting a chance to talk to Melanie.
Well, I mean, Kira, you didn't just get a chance to talk to Melanie. I mean, let's tell our audience the truth here. You're one of the lead authors of this report, right? So you did all the research, you worked with the team to come up with the questions. Kira's a lot more than just a pretty voice, folks. She's the brains behind this outfit. So I just want to make sure to call that out for everybody. Kira, I'm dying to ask you. I know you didn't really get a chance to talk about this with Melanie, but we've done this now with corporate board member for the last 5 years. But corporate board member has been doing this for 20 something years. What stood out for you this year? Like, do you have like sort of a top pick, a favorite stat from the report?
So it's always hard for me to pick just one. And luckily, I got to ask Melanie about a lot of the things that jumped out for me. But one thing that's sort of cropped up recently in my mind, ever since a few days ago, Dottie, you and I had the chance to participate in a virtual roundtable with directors and C suite members as part of our partnership with Fortune. And in that roundtable, we were doing sort of a 2025 look ahead as well. As part of that, we also had a speaker from the World Economic Forum coming hot out of Davos, and they just released their 2025 risk report as well. For them, one of the top risks discussed in that WEF report was geopolitical turbulence and risk. And this came up on our What Directors Think report, right? Directors were thinking about supply chain, they're thinking about international regulation, tariffs, things like that. But as far as 2025 priorities go, geopolitical risk did not come up very highly at all. In fact, I think of the listed options that directors could choose from, it came in last place. So maybe a little bit of a discrepancy there that we can look further into.
I think that's really interesting. That stood out for me too. You'd expect that number to be a lot higher, especially given when we fielded the survey, right? Because we fielded it partly prior to the U.S. presidential election and partly after. And so, regardless of whether you were talking to people in October or November, there's a lot happening in the geopolitical landscape, not just in the U.S. but globally. There's a lot of turbulence. There's a lot of change. And so, when we talk to directors these days, the things we're hearing are look, we have good indication from the Trump administration about where they're heading, but the timing is a big question mark. And we also don't know the downstream impact of some of the policies, including things like tariffs and how that's going to impact supply chains. And, so there's a lot of unknowns. I guess to quote Donald Rumsfeld, which I try really hard never to do, known unknowns. But yeah, it was really interesting to see that didn't come up higher in the list of priorities for 2025. I'm not quite sure. What do you make of that, if you had to guess why that was?
Well, let me jump in here because come back to the commentary around what's happening in cyber, and it's sort of falling in the rankings. But Melanie's hypothesis that it's not necessarily more under control than ever, but it is something that's been on the docket for a long time, and boards increasingly pay a lot of attention to it. So it's sort of stabilized in that sense. And I come back to a lot of our conversations that there are more risks than ever, and again, how do you prioritize against these? And it's really going to depend on what the objectives of the company are, the industry that you're in, and the personal challenges that you're facing. And so we might see in the years ahead this really become an even race amongst 10, 15 items.
Yeah, it's really true, Megan. I guess I was going to sort of share what was my top pick from this year's survey. And I think one of the things that really stood out for me is how high on the list of priorities CEO and C-suite succession planning was this year. That felt new to me. I know that's been rising in the ranks the last couple of years, but for it to be the second priority was really surprising. And actually, maybe it wasn't too surprising, given that 2024 saw the greatest exodus of public company CEOs on record. beating the previous record holder, which was 2023. So, we're seeing a trend. We're seeing a lot of public company CEOs either retire or leave to go work at a private company. And, I don't know how that changes in coming years, but it also is, I think, amplified and augmented by the fact that a lot of directors are saying they're not entirely sure that their C suite has the skill set needed to lead the company through the AI age. And that's another big concern for directors and for C suites. Kira, I don't know if what you made of that, but that's sort of that was my big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to keep an eye on, when we do this survey each year, the confluence of what's coming up on the priority order and what's coming up on the board agenda, and then what directors say that they're having a hard time overseeing, because that's probably going to be a problem, right? So if it's a top priority for them, but only, I think, 41% of directors in the survey rated their succession planning process as good or excellent, that's an area of concern.
Well, that has me think. I think we need to tackle CEO succession planning on this show. We haven't talked about it, I think, in depth in quite some time. So let's definitely add it to the docket.
It sounds like a plan, Megan.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Corporate Director Podcast. We'd like to say a couple of special thank yous to head researcher Melanie Nolen, podcast producers Kira Ciccarelli and Steve Clayton, our sponsors, PwC, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, and Meridian Compensation Partners, and most especially to Diligent. If you like our show, be sure to give us a rating on your podcast player of choice. You can also listen to our episodes and check out more of our work at Diligent Institute by going to diligent.com/resources. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Corporate Director Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to learn more about corporate governance and tools to help directors do their job better, visit www.diligent.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.